we're going to start at the table and then we can move to the ironing board. I think if you do a little pre-pinning here, then it'll make it easier at the ironing board. But we only have a couple of ironing boards and I can't have everybody all standing and waiting for the ironing board. So if you do the pre-pinning at your table, then you can get to the ironing board. It won't take you that long. So we're going to turn this upper edge down 1/2 inch. And so that means that it's the first kind of, or it's the midway between one and the end, so halfway between. And make sure that you have a seam gauge that this thing is going to stay stuck, because if it moves around, then it's really not helping you. So make sure you have it right on the 1/2 inch. And if you notice too, I have the edge of the upper edge of the shorts away from me because I find that that helps pinning better. It's harder to do it if you're here and you're trying to pin like that. It's much easier to pin back towards you. So pick a seam line. It doesn't matter which one it is. This one happens to be the back. And I'm going to fold this edge down 1/2 inch. I'm going to use my seam gauge to make sure that from where the slider is to the end is 1/2 inch, and I want to make sure that this seam line lines up. And I'm going to put a pin in, and it needs to go in and out of that. It should not lift up once you do that. Then I'm going to go over to the next seam line. Oh, I wanted to tell you something about the front and back seams. We don't want this seam allowance to be twisted, so if you're not sure which direction it goes, start down at the center between the legs and move up and make sure that you have it pressed the same direction, because it's really uncomfortable if you end up with a twist in there. So make sure that it's going the same direction. Now I have the side pockets, so my side seam goes towards the front. If you have no side pockets, then your side seam should be going towards the back. And there's just a couple of extra long threads here I'm going to trim off. I am not trimming all of them off. So again, I'm going to fold this down 1/2 inch. Make sure my seam line lines up. And then I'm going to put my pin in. And then I'm going to go back in between those two. I'm going to do this from seam line to seam line. Then I'm going to go halfway between the two. This is one of those two ends first, middle things. So halfway between, and I'm going to put a pin in. We want to make sure that this is nice and even all the way around the top, because it will affect your casing if you don't. Okay? So because we're going to press this on the ironing board, we don't have to put the pins real close together. They need to be about 3 fingers apart. And don't forget, measure every time. Don't just plop this down and hope that it's 1/2 inch. Measure every time. Okay, and then the next thing that you're going to do is you go around to the next seam, fold it down. Remember, center front should be going the same direction at the top as it is at the bottom. Fold that down 1/2 inch and pin it. Make sure that seam allowance lines up. And then go halfway in between. Again, making sure that's exactly 1/2 inch. And then, if you notice, one of the things I'm doing is once I know it's at 1/2 inch, I'm not pressing real hard, but I'm just kind of mushing down, which helps keep it from flapping up at me. You know, Miss Jones uses all kinds of really technical terms like mushing and flapping. It's part of my sewing vocabulary. Okay, and then I've got a couple more pins I need to put over here, maybe about 3 more. Oh, I actually put these a little closer together than I did the other ones. I probably don't need that one. Okay, so I have pressed or I have pinned about halfway around. I'm going to let you finish doing that whole thing all the way around the top, and then I'm going to head to the ironing board and I'm going to show you how to press this so that we have a nice crisp edge whenever we get ready to do the next step. So now that I have pinned that upper edge every 2 to maybe about 3 fingers apart all the way around, I'm going to slide the top of my shorts or pants onto the ironing board. And I want to make sure that I have my iron on and we've got a little bit of steam. And I also need to have my press cloth because we should never press over pins without using a press cloth. So I kind of mushed mine a little bit with my fingers so it's staying pretty flat. But before I actually press, I'm going to make sure that it's right at a 1/2 inch all the way around, and then I'm going to lay my press cloth. Remember, my press cloth is just a piece of muslin. It's not anything fancy. And then I'm just going to give a little bit of pressure, and I can even give it a shot of steam along here. And then take it and move it around to the next section. Press cloth. Press. And you're not moving back and forth a lot. All you're doing is you want to get some pressure on that edge so that this will stay folded under whenever you turn it down, because our next thing is to take all of our pins out and we're going to turn this down 1.5 inches. So we want that edge to stay tucked under. I'm going to give this one more time because my iron doesn't seem quite hot enough. And maybe I didn't let it sit long enough. Okay. And then I'm going to move it a little bit more. You notice mine has, I've got these long pink strings here, and that's my basting where I put my pocket there. And that's so when I turn this down, that upper edge of my pocket is actually going to be inside my casing. And then we'll take the basting out because we don't want it to show. Okay, a little bit of steam across there, make sure it's nice and crisp. Should be almost back to the beginning. Now, I used to have kids do this with the wooden iron, and the problem with the wooden iron, it's really a good tool for some kinds of things, but sometimes kids push too hard on it and they rub back and forth real hard and it ends up stretching out this upper edge. And you really don't want that edge to stretch out because it needs to match up with this part right here where it's going to attach. And so I've had students who the edge of their fabric was ruffly, and it was because they had just pushed on it too hard with the wooden iron. Now, if I have done this correctly, when I take my pins out, I should have a nice creased edge here, and that so I know where I have to fold this for the next measurement down. And to go and do that measuring, I'm going back to my table so that somebody else can use the ironing board to do the pressing, and I'm going to get that part measured and ready for stitching.